DJ Event Planner will change the way you manage and run your business. Streamline all of your procedures and software into one easy-to-manage system. DJ Event Planner, the ultimate online planning tool.
Hey, it worked. Good evening and welcome to Star Wars Chat with Ben Stowe and John Young. Tonight we're going to be talking about all Star Wars all the time.
Game on.
For those of you who are here to
shoot for it.
For those of you who are here to hear about speakers, come on. Yeah. We have news. We have Star Wars news. Big things
coming up soon. December.
Well, today's big news about Solo coming out. You heard that. I'm sure.
Yeah. But I mean, one at a time, I think, you know?
Let's get excited about the first one and then we'll go to the second one.
I'm ready for the next Last Jedi.
The next Last Jedi. Oh, just getting audio levels adjusted here. Hey, thank you guys for joining us tonight. We are going to be talking about speakers and things that can happen bad for your speakers. And we actually had some reports from bad things happening to speakers from the weekend, which didn't coincide with when we picked the topic and such. It just happened. And
it's as though you're psychic, John. You know, you make these shows and suddenly speakers wrecked.
Oh, next week's show is going to be about DJs winning the lottery and ordering things from Ben.
Watch next week for the winning numbers.
Yeah, exactly. After they've been drawn for Saturday night's drawing.
Did I ever tell you the story about, and now I'm going to tell you and about 6,000 of my closest friends.
There we go.
Did I ever tell you the time my grandma locked her keys in the car and my son was just a toddler and she had the little code thing you punch on the side of the car, and my grandma could barely work a coffee pot. You know, I love my grandma, but technology and my grandma just were not pals. Mm-hmm. So she had never touched this code and had no idea what this code was. And in the meantime, you know, we called a tow truck and all that sort of thing. And my son, who's high energy, go figure, he says, well, I'll punch in the code. I'll get us in the car. And he's about 3.
No way.
You know? And you know, I said, no, don't touch it. And my grandma said, you know, if it keeps him busy, great. 5 seconds. He said he's got the car unlocked.
No way.
Oh, absolutely could not believe it myself. You know, in fact, I don't think he realized the car was unlocked, so he was still pushing buttons. We're like, get away from it, open the door. You know? Good job, son. Now write down the next 5 numbers that come to mind, you know?
Here's a list of numbers, points. 5 of them.
Anyway, yes. So no, I did not pimp my son out to win the lottery. I didn't win the lottery, so, you know, but he did get us in the car. So. I mean, AAA couldn't believe it. When we called them, I mean, you know, the lady on the other line of the tow truck company said, you got to have a better story than that. You know, did somebody help you in the car? You know, we said, no, seriously. And she just said, come on now, you know.
My little guy, he just kind of channeled the energy from the lock. And the next thing you know, we're in. Yay. Yep, it had to have been, you know, the passcode like they used in Spaceballs. 1,
you know,
2.
I just spent the last week speaking at 3 back-to-back worship technology events. And you know, from the show last week, we had my friend Doug Gould make a quick guest appearance. Yep. And he was talking about how you can passcode lock the software for a mixing console. So you could lock the console so nobody could go in and you know, screw with your settings. And I couldn't help it. I was in the back of the room and he's up there presenting. And he says, well, my code is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I shouted out, that's the code to my luggage. Like, you know, the worst thing was nobody really got it. They kind of looked and they went, okay.
Well, okay, for all fairness, you were at a Christian event and they probably, you know, Spaceballs.
Now, wait a minute. You're a Christian. I'm a Christian.
I know, but you know, we're more radical than some. You were in the South and maybe.
Golly, yeah.
I don't know. Although I do, if I remember correctly, when I was doing the youth pastor thing, the kids, when we were talking about what movies to play, somebody in the junior high, it wasn't my boys, threw out Spaceballs. We should watch Spaceballs. And of course, I remembered that there's a clean version and the other. And my boys were like, yeah, we should watch, because we've watched it a few times.
Listen, I mean, I've toured with Christian bands, and I imagine like the public thinks that everybody on the bus is just devoted all their time to Bible study. And, I mean, just in case you don't know any Christians, let me tell you, we're pretty regular and normal, actually. Yeah. We watch the same movies you do. So
yes, my wife
even on the bus,
my wife and I have watched all the Die Harder movies, and when we leave, it's like, yeah, do it again, blow it up, woo! Well, at least Lori's that way. I'm not. I'm a little more conservative, but yeah, I digress. So, speakers, let's jump into tonight's topic. If you are watching us out on Facebook Live, thank you for joining us. And both, we got quite a few people here tonight. Maybe we should talk Star Wars more often. Maybe we
Game on. You can see it would break my heart. So
yeah, maybe we have to put that on a future show. But we got the link for the YouTube where we follow the chat more on YouTube, of course. And if you are watching, please give it a thumbs up if you are joining us and such on Facebook or the other on YouTube. That would be appreciated. So it is time to talk about bad things that can happen to your speakers.
Well, so, I was thinking about this list and I was laughing to myself a little bit because when you created the show and Jimmy created the graphic, you said 10 things. And I thought 10, 1, 0. And I thought in engineering, really nothing ends in 0. So it was sort of an arbitrary number to get to. And I made a couple lists and sort of cross-referenced and combined some things. And I did work it out to 10.
Oh, I was going to say,
it's not an exhaustive list.
Probably at 47, you brought it down to 10.
Well, it depends on how thinly you want to slice things. And I also reached out to a few friends of mine who are loudspeaker engineers and loudspeaker service technicians, because the engineers, of course, are trying to build loudspeakers that can survive just about anything, but also be sold at a price that's appealing. And the technicians see, obviously, the other side of the equation when there's a failure. And I'm very fortunate to have friends like that. And one example would be Mike Caston, who's been on our show a few times. Yep. And so it was interesting how universal some of the answers were. I guess it means we're kind of on the right track here, but it doesn't mean it's exhaustive. And in consensus of these discussions, we have a consensus number 1, actually. And it's interesting to me as I look down at my list here that overwhelmingly these are self-inflicted issues. Overwhelmingly, the problems are of our own making, we who use the speakers. And I guess that says a lot about the engineers that do a good job of making a product that doesn't spontaneously combust.
We could talk about that speaker too. Back
time to mention that Samsung bought Harman, which owns JBL. But
when did that happen? I didn't.
Last year, actually.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think we'll have spontaneously combusting JBL.
No.
That joke's sort of tired and played out in the pro audio community anyway. So our consensus number 1 is clipping the input. And we have to get some clarity, some distinction of terms here. We're not talking about limiting. We're talking about clipping the input itself. And every powered loudspeaker has an amplifier built in. And on the front end of that amplifier, just like in your rack mount amplifier, is an analog input circuit. And if you clip that input circuit, that doesn't mean that your speaker is putting out its maximum volume. That's not what we mean here. We mean that the input signal itself is too hot for that analog circuit, and we're clipping off the top part of that circuit, which means the circuit is on more than it should be. And we don't have necessarily DC energy, but we have no longer good sine forms. And so we've shortened the duty cycle of that circuit. And long story short, it's very, very, very hard on the amplifier and the loudspeaker itself. It's just hard on everything after that. And once you clip the signal, there's nothing you can do to unclip it at that point, which actually leads us to number 2, but we'll get to that in a second. So that's number 1, clipping the input. And I think there's probably at least 2 or 3 that all come down to one thing here. and that is gain structure. And I realize I might as well just be speaking, Greek or something, with apologies to our Greek speaking viewers, but,
Yes, because we have a lot of those.
well, so, whatever, you get the analogy, I think.
Yeah.
The point is, when I say gain structure, people's eyes roll back in their head and their head starts spinning around and they start flopping around on the floor. But this is one of the most fundamentally important things that you can do to have good signal and good sound quality and maximum output of your system. It was remarkable a couple of years ago at Mobile Beat that we had a couple of engineers and we had people coming in, and we were basically giving impromptu gain structure lessons on speakers. And they were like, wow, that sounds a lot better. That's a lot louder. So clipping is not the same as achieving the maximum output of your speaker. It is sending a signal that is too hot. We have to think about this in terms of voltage, too much voltage for that analog input circuit. And thus it doesn't have the dynamic range left. It clips it and you get a mess. That's number one. So
if we want to visualize this using water and tubes or hoses, can we use that?
You can't, because what you'd have to do, is you'd have to have a wave of water that then gets cleaved off. You really can't visualize it using water because it's unique in the sense that it requires clipping the waveform, and of course sound travels in waves, and so we no longer have a sound wave at that point.
So the energy that's coming in isn't the amount of energy that's coming in, it's the
amplitude. Yeah, it's too high. It's too much energy. I guess I can't think of a hydraulic analog to your water
visual
analogy.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a visual that will help people understand. We're trying to convert from techie to the layman.
Try turning your mixing board down, maybe.
Let's just start with it.
And I'll tell you what, this is a really good. This is going to take us right into number 2. It just drives me absolutely bananas. And I love my non-technical friends because they need technical friends like me. So it's a good symbiotic relationship. And so I still love you, but it drives me just bats when people call me and say, well, I had it set at 2:00. It's not a clock. It's an input gain trim. It's an amplifier. It's not a clock, but I understand that people use the clock dial reference, well, it was only at 12:00. So, it's a question of voltage. And I know people who are watching are probably just as frustrated right now and saying, well, what should we tell you? It's just not that easy. We really could do a whole show on gain structure and probably should. But that's not the show for today. So that brings us to number 2. And by the way, fixing gain structure starts at the inputs and works its way through. So we really need to start this all the way back at the microphone or the line level input. And then it's the way through the mixer and then any other outboard processing. And then the very last is the amplifier. So with that in mind, great segue. Number 2, a distorted or clipped signal, meaning it's not clipping at the input. It's clipped before it gets to the input. Because there's stages of gain all throughout. There is amplifiers inside your mixing board and that sort of thing. Obviously much smaller ones, but there are circuits that can be clipped, op amps and that sort of thing. And if that signal is clipped coming into your speaker, the only thing your speaker can do is make it a louder clipped signal. It just can't make it sound better. It'll just make a louder, obnoxious, awful signal. And while it sounds bad, it's also really bad on the loudspeaker because once again, we now have these malformed waveforms and we're stressing out everything inside the loudspeaker, especially the driver. So that's number 2. I sort of sprinkle these are not necessarily in order except for number 1. So kind of moving away from moving away from the electrical signal anyway, on to number 3. With apologies to a mutual friend of ours, this is rain and or drinks. Water and electricity are not pals. And if you're going to use a powered loudspeaker outside, you need to make sure that it is sheltered from rain. However you safely do that, whether it's a weather cover or some other means. Another thing to remember is if your powered loudspeaker has a fan, And if it's an intake fan, it could be pulling water into the enclosure. So just, beware of that. Obviously that fan, isn't gonna, pull gentle raindrops in, but if you have water on the enclosure, that fan can certainly pull that moisture inside. And drinks, well, that's kind of self-explanatory.
And I hear those do bad things.
Yeah, we found out this weekend. You were just telling me about a mutual friend of ours who had a drink spilled on a brand new powered speaker, and there's only so much you can do at that point. And drinks are even worse. Yeah. Drinks are even worse than rain. I mean, obviously rain has some impurities in it, but drinks, you got the whole mess there,
I mean, is there any way, okay, let's just put a little tangent here. I'm at a show and I've got this and somebody spills and it goes somehow gets into the back of my speaker where the amplifier is. Is there anything a person possibly could do to save it, or basically once that liquid hits it, it's toast?
No, you could power it off immediately and hope that there's been no damage to the circuits. Distilled water won't hurt it, but you really do, that's very unlikely you're going to have distilled water spilled in it. And so you're going to have water with impurities, which are ions, which make it electrically conductive, and that could cause things to short out. In fact, if we look, the spaces on circuit boards are getting very, very small now. So it's very easy for things to short out and cause damage. But if you could immediately power it off, and if there was no circuitry that was permanently damaged, then you could clean and resurrect that speaker at some point, the electronics or whatever. So it's going to be hit and miss,
Yeah. And the question really becomes is, can a person get there before electric arcs?
And you might. It's going to take some luck, but there's a lot of stories of electronics that survive these things, but there's also a lot of stories of electronics that don't.
Yeah.
So we're just going to leave it at, don't get them wet.
Yeah. Keep away.
Especially not the inside, just don't let the water get to the electronics. Staying on the environmental here, the next is thermal and sunlight, direct sunlight. Unbelievable how much power is in direct sunlight. And of course, most loudspeaker cabinets are black. And if you look at most of the stadium installs and things, if you look at some of the professional sports stadiums and things that we've done, those cabinets are gray and they're not active, they're passive. So that shows just how big of a concern heat is. And so if you take an active loudspeaker out in the sun, and I know somebody's watching saying, I do it all the time. Listen, it just doesn't mean that I would recommend it. You should certainly shelter that thing if you can. Here's why. These internal components are trying very hard to keep themselves cool, with or without a fan, okay? And when you add all that additional heat energy just from the sun coming on that black enclosure, you're making it very difficult. These things are trying to keep themselves around, under 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And so speaking of heat, I got a graphic I want to pull up here. Let me see if I can do this here real quick.
We like graphics.
Yay,
graphic time. And cookies and milk, we like it.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned cookies.
Coffee and brownies, close enough.
So this is a slide that I used in a PowerPoint. And what this shows is the drive signal in decibels, the increase in drive relative to temperature Celsius. And I've converted it for people who are non-Celsius. And so basically, if you look where the coffee cup is, that's the temperature at which water boils. That's the temperature at which the voice coil in your speaker could make you coffee. It's 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. And if we look further down the line, you'll see the vertical blue line and the 392 degrees Fahrenheit. And just for the sake of illustration, I've pointed out that about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, you bake brownies. So no cookies, but brownies.
You can't go wrong with brownies.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. Yeah. But that's not what we're trying to do with this loudspeaker. We're trying to make music, not brownies.
True.
And so what I did here is to show the logarithmic relationship between increase in drive signal and temperature. All right. So take a look. Just a 3 dB rise here between the two blue vertical lines. And you see the horizontal red line with two arrows. We go from 392 degrees Fahrenheit to 707 degrees Fahrenheit. That is blisteringly hot. That is blisteringly hot. That is an increase of 315 degrees Fahrenheit to rise 3 decibels.
Where in my sound system would it ever get that hot?
Well, your voice coil inside
Really?
the loudspeaker, which I'll come back to I'll come back to the camera here in a second and show you an example. And just for fun, because I actually like to read. I'm a literate sound guy. I know.
We have brownies on this. You say just for fun, and we have brownies on the screen, and you're going to go with a book, dude.
I am, but it's Ray Bradbury, and those who've read Fahrenheit 451 know that that's the temperature at which paper burns. So you can see there that we're past the burning temperature of paper with that loudspeaker. Now, obviously, the leading manufacturers, the quality manufacturers, they have treated their paper cones so that they don't burst into flames.
Might be a good
because
thing.
They understand that heat's part of the deal. But this is a corresponding slide. Not everybody has done that, apparently. And this picture circulated around the internet. I don't know whose picture it is. I apologize to whoever's it is. But anyway, you can see the picture, I think, right, John?
Yep. And wasn't there a speaker manufacturer, and I don't know if this particular cabinet was from that company, but there was one that was using a light bulb as a fuse in their cabinets for a period of time? And that
there's actually several that do. That's actually not all that uncommon. It helps burn off some of the transient energy and that sort of thing. So now back to the camera. Let me show you an example here. We were just talking about amplifier temperature when we talked about the 185, and then that graph transitioned to voice coil temperature. All right.
Yeah.
And you say, well, what's a voice coil? Okay. So inside your loudspeaker, you have your cone. Okay. And on the back side of that cone, you have a permanent magnet, which would be here. And I've taken it off. And you have a voice coil, a copper winding, which becomes an electromagnet. And if you look, you can see how very dark this coil is.
Yep.
That's because it got very, very, very hot.
What color should it be?
They start out as a bright copper, like a brand new penny.
Okay.
And of course they'll darken over time. But this one got very hot. In fact, here you can see this wire down here. Maybe you can see that.
Yeah, looks kind of crunchy.
It delaminated. It got so hot that it started to separate, and ultimately the speaker failed. So we'll talk about this again. This is gonna come back around when we get back to some signal things. But the point is, heat isn't your friend. Okay, there's no part of heat that is good for you. So just sort of bear that in mind.
So is that how you talk Cheyenne into staying up on Bemidji? Heat is not your friend.
Heat is not your friend. That's right.
No part of heat is good for you. Bemidji, 30 below.
Yeah, it's a difficult argument to win.
You're a smooth talker. I got to work on that with Lori. She wants to move south. Heat is not your friend.
Cheyenne. So yeah, you and I both might be relocated to the south here. But in fact, I remember a conversation. I'm going to put this right out there on the internet, YouTube, and the whole world. Okay, this is just in case anything happens to me. All right.
Yeah, you people are finding out way too much about our families sometimes. So I'm just saying.
My wife and her best friend were conversing one day, and my wife said to me, she said, "When you and Joe die," Joe is her best friend's husband. She said, "When you and Joe die, my best friend and I are moving to this state." And I said, "Wait, what do you mean when? Like we're both going to die at the same time? Is this going to be some random event? Because this seems oddly specific."
Man, way too planned here.
But that was many years ago, and I'm still here. So I guess
the down payment on the house hasn't been made yet.
Yeah, and they moved to California. Her best friend and they moved to California, and we're still here. So I don't know if that means I'm in better shape or worse, but
the clock is ticking.
My time might be limited, folks. These videos might become very, very valuable. Anyway, so here's number 5 on our list: excessive boost. And typically this happens when people are trying to make a top box sound like a sub, or they're trying to make it sound like they have a sub. And let me just tell you, there's no substitution for a subwoofer. Okay. No, you are just going to send your speaker to meet the great big speaker maker in the sky. All right.
A little bit quicker if you're trying to push too much through.
Yeah. Which, I'm going to circle back on that with number 7, but we're going to go to number 6. So we talked about clipping, and we talked about clip signals. Now we're going to talk about heavy compression. And most modern music is already fairly heavily compressed when it's recorded. And I think people often equate compression with a reduction in signal. And that's not really the case. It's more a case of squishing more energy into one place. And that's how things like this happen, where these things get so hot, they heat up so much because there's so much energy all the time. You reduce the crest factor. And so that heat that's, again, heat isn't your friend. And another place we see this is when people drive their powered speakers into limit, which is different, of course, than clip, like we talked about. But basically, the speaker starts compressing to protect itself, and they keep pushing it into heavy limit. An occasional flicker of the limit light, probably not an issue. Depends on the manufacturer, but probably not an issue. If that thing's staying on all the time, you're really driving a high energy compressed signal, and you are cooking that thing. You're making brownies, all right? And you're making brown voice coils. I don't know if I have any other examples of a cooked voice coil. I did bring a few. Yeah, it's probably the best one. This one's pretty small. We'll look at this one in a minute. I have a great collection of junk. One person's blown speaker is my teaching tool.
Yep, and that works well.
So take 5 and 6 here. Excessive boost of frequencies, particularly low frequency, because people are trying to make it sound like they got a sub when they don't. Just get a sub. That's just get a sub. And then heavy compression or driving your speaker into excessive limit leads us to number 7. You got the wrong rig for the gig.
Ooh, and that even kind of goes.
It's clever, right?
It is. It was pretty cool. I mean, there could be a shirt.
I'm going to patent that. I'm going to trademark that. Listen, you got to have enough rig for the gig. And the beautiful thing about speakers like the new Evolve and the RCF Evox and small speakers like that is their portability, but you can't cheat physics. All right. I was talking to a guy on the phone today, in fact, and I said, listen, if you could take a single 18 subwoofer and do arenas with it, we would be doing that. We're not in love with loading and unloading trucks either. We don't bring in semi loads of speakers because we need the workout. I mean, I do, but that's not why we do it. It's physics. You can't cheat physics. All right. And so you have to have the right rig for the gig. And in this case, those previous 2 issues, 5 and 6 we saw, are probably indicative that you don't.
Right.
If you need the sound of a subwoofer, you need a subwoofer. If you are driving that speaker into limit, you need more speaker, period. And when it blows up, it's not their fault. It's your fault. Harsh words, I know, but doggone it, it's the truth, And
I think you see that a lot in the DJ world because we can play to 500 people with our 2 top speakers and single sub. No, you can't.
And I get pictures from friends and customers who are showing me the very impressive gigs they're doing with systems I sold them, and they're super happy. And sometimes I cringe a little. I'm like, ooh, I'm glad it's working for you, but boy, I wouldn't have done that. It's like, I'm glad it's exceeding your expectations, because it's certainly exceeding mine. But sooner or later, that's a recipe for disaster. Yeah,
but I don't send you that many pictures, Ben. Okay.
Well, I wasn't going to name you by name, John, but
yeah.
But I think the point is here that you can get away with just about anything for a little bit sometimes. Maybe not the drinks thing, but
that doesn't work, Ben.
But that's not a good long-term plan, and failure often is a cumulative effect. So it may not even fail at the gig that occurred at. It just you weaken that thing, and sooner or later it's going to fail down the road. So number 8, we mentioned how heat is not your friend. Neither is cold. And here's 2 reasons that cold is bad, especially when you're talking about the kind of cold that we get. You go from cold to warm very quickly. And you take these circuit boards that are very cold and you bring them into warm, moist air, and that warm, moist air condenses. And now you have rain inside your speaker. You've got water inside your speaker now. So number 1, that's a bad thing. Let them warm up gradually. Don't bring it in from the cold trailer and power it on right away. Show up early, We've talked about that. We did a show where I think I put on a coat and
you did
suffered because it was, of course, I was inside the studio, so it's, it was warm in the studio, and I was miserably hot in the coat. But anyway, number 2 reason that cold is not your friend. Check this poor speaker out. When things get cold, those of us who live in the Arctic here know this. They lose their flexibility.
Yes.
Right. And not just speakers, but people too.
People do. Yeah.
But this poor thing. Pieces are still falling out of it. This used to be the surround that the cone, Yeah. It got real cold and then it got slammed real hard and it is done. So, number 9. I feel like now I got pieces of surround everywhere.
I was going to say, you've got pieces of speaker going, and you've got our little dog that decided.
I have such an understanding wife. It's a miracle that I am still here.
Well, she does have a plan B, so.
Wait, what do you know about plan B?
We're finding out about it. I didn't know such things existed.
You got me nervous now, John. Have Lori and Cheyenne been talking?
I'm a little concerned about that. I'm going to have to find out here. As we're headed south,
right.
Starts looking at houses, I'm going to really be concerned.
So number 9 is being dropped.
Mm.
And it doesn't take much of a drop, when things fall, they accelerate and they gain energy. And when they stop, that energy has to be dissipated. So picture it, if you will. This mounted in a loudspeaker enclosure, mounted by screws in the front. More surround is raining on top of me. In the back, we have this magnet, the permanent magnet, and it's pretty heavy. And so you can imagine when this thing drops and stops moving, the magnet wants to keep moving. Now, in most cases, the magnet will stay put, but not all. And here's where this gets troublesome. We're going to take a smaller one because it's easier to hold. Okay. This is a high frequency driver here. And so here we have our coil, just like in the other speaker. Yep. This is the diaphragm. And what we see here, this is what the permanent magnet looks like. For all intents and purposes, pretty much the same. Some of the bigger ones will have vents and things in here, but that's not the point. What we're focusing on here today is this little gap right here. The little gap is where that coil goes in, and that coil goes in the gap and moves in and out. All right, very fast. That's what produces the sound, the relationship of the electromagnet and the permanent magnet. And so you can imagine what happens if that moves even just a fraction of a millimeter when it stops. When you drop that, if that magnet shifts even just a fraction of a millimeter, now that voice coil is rubbing. And it doesn't have to rub very long before it's toast.
Yeah.
So again, it may work for a gig or 2 or 10 after it was dropped, but sooner or later, it's not. And you maybe don't even remember that you dropped it, but that might have been
in that particular case. Now, say we had that, would you notice because you would just lose the highs, lose the lows, or would you have like a burning smell, or
probably just lose them? And it would almost certainly be the lows, because the highs have little bitty magnets and the lows have great big magnets. So it's almost always the lows. And again, it's rare, and it does take some force. I mean, this isn't every time your speaker gets dropped, but again, it can be a cumulative effect too. Just try not to drop stuff. It makes sense. I think, so just for fun, since we showed a diaphragm, I'm going to show a diaphragm where the crossover failed and allowed a low frequency to get through to a high frequency driver. So the driver was given frequencies it's not designed to reproduce, and it slammed into the phase plug on top of it and just absolutely destroyed that high frequency diaphragm. Again, one man's junk is another man's teaching tool. So
now in that particular case, how would you have noticed that diaphragm was cracked? Would it have been completely out, or would it be because the sound?
No, you'd have still heard sound because the coil was intact, and it would have still been rattling. It would have just sounded obnoxious and terrible. You'd have certainly noticed a decrease in volume, but you heard a lot of crackling and things before it deteriorated so much that it just wasn't able to move air adequately anymore and make sound.
So what it kind of sounded like dubstep. No. Okay. Sorry, I thought it was a good spot for that one.
I got nothing for that.
I've been holding out of that joke for 2 years. I didn't find.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Young.
Finally, chuck that one down.
All right. I'll do the nerdery. You do the jokes. How about that?
Yeah, we'll do well. We'll make millions. Our wives will be living down in Florida in a nice house, and we'll be up here freezing our Kaduskis off. Yeah, I got that.
Well, all right. Number 10.
Ta-da.
Because I just have nothing else to contribute to that. So
And we move on.
yeah, I got nothing. Number 10, bad power. And this can manifest itself in a variety of ways. Undervolt, overvolt, just plain dirty power. Certainly testing a receptacle is a good idea. Many modern loudspeakers have auto-sensing power supplies. But it was interesting as I talked to engineers at loudspeaker companies, again, like Mike Caston, who, sees things globally. They're engineering these not just for the United States, but for the world. And we're pretty lucky. Our power grid actually is a lot better than a lot of other people's, that they're seeing that as a major issue in some other countries where the power grid is not nearly as stable. That power is an issue, but it certainly is an issue here in the United States from time to time as well. So bad power is a biggie. Meter your outputs, make sure, you have clean signal where possible. That can be a problem.
Yeah. And then that's one that I know I have suffered with. And I think our internet issues that we were having today could be related to power issues.
Well, I tell you, we see it in so many ways and places, power issues affecting, video signals and everything.
Yeah.
Let's face it, at the end of the day, everything we use runs on electricity and not just runs on electricity, but it is electricity inside of it. Until it reaches this point where the electrical energy gets converted to acoustic energy, it's electricity at every stage of the game. That's what it is.
That it is. That it is. Just following the chats here. We've got a few folks between the two.
Maybe some horror stories they want to share, or questions you want to ask.
There were some questions.
Star Wars.
Somebody was asking, getting replacement cones, speakers. Where can a person get those? Is that something that you can? If they call you up and say, "Hey, Ben, I need a JBL Control 8," or what they have here.
Yeah, we can get replacement OEM drivers for just about everything. Just about, I would say. Sometimes people opt to recone, which means to cut out the bad cone and coil and put in a new one. A good recone job is as good as new. A bad recone job is garbage. I have a friend who watches the show, in fact, who just had a bunch of stuff reconed and they all failed within a week. Ooh. So, if it's a cheap recone, it's probably not a good recone. I hate to say that way, but it's probably true, So reconing is one option, but certainly getting replacement drivers, they can do that from us. Yeah.
Another question, we were talking about this actually before Dave posted it, but Dave is signed a contract to do a spin at an outdoor ice skating rink this winter. Any tips for his gear outside like that? It sounds like he's going to be doing 2-hour blocks on Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, ease into it, particularly if it's really cold outside. Think about that surround being blasted off there. Here again, having enough rig for the gig will help. You're not going to have to push your stuff as hard. Just kind of ease into it a bit, play a little, maybe some background music, if you will, or whatever, just something to sort of get a little bit of movement going on. You don't have to worry so much about condensation because the air is going to be cold and that that's what it's going to be, So the air doesn't have a lot of moisture when it's cold. My biggest concern would just be really slamming those drivers. We do an outdoor ice festival, as you know, and they have bands. And so that's kind of what our strategy has been, to just sort of play a little music for a while and let stuff just kind of get a little warmth to it, a little motion to it, and then let her rip, I don't know if that actually works. I've never actually metered anything to see what the temperature rise of those devices would be. but we don't have failures. So,
and that's an important part of it for sure. And then the final question that came up about 5 or 6 times early in our show was, when is the gain structure show scheduled for?
boy, we should charge admission for that one, because it's just, and of course we don't, which is great. I love what you do for the DJ community, but we should do it. And I think it's something we want to take the time to prepare to do it right, to leave people not more confused. It's not overly confusing, but it seems to confuse people, if that makes any sense at all. It's kind of like that statement.
Yeah, exactly. Backwards and forwards and sideways too.
Yeah. It's, we just have to think about things in terms of voltage. So, which is difficult at times. And sometimes there aren't adequate meters to help us with that. So maybe I'll give some thought about how we can demonstrate this well with gear. And I think we can show good and bad gain structure. Of course, we basically did a class on gain structure at the audio symposium, and you could just literally see the light bulbs go on over people's heads. Okay, maybe it wasn't literal, but you could see people go, wow, oh, that just makes a ton of sense. And when we did it bad, you also saw that same look of familiarity where people said, I've heard that.
Oh yeah, I've done that one.
That's bad gain structure. So that's something you and I should stay tuned, viewers.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll work on that and come up with a game plan.
A gain plan.
A game plan. Oh yeah, I see what you did there. Yeah. Somebody's asking about, what is a good range for voltage range?
A good range for voltage range, like as in like wall voltage?
I'm not sure. So let's look at the voltage, because I know when I have had my voltmeter.
Oh, I'm trying to remember here now. I think it's C84. There's a standard for this, and I'm disappointed in myself that I can't pull it right out of the air. Somebody can Google it real quick and tell me. But there is actually an established range for what is supposed to be acceptable for the voltage at the utilization point, which is the outlet. But I would say we don't want to see anything below 110, and we don't want to see anything over 130. That's a pretty wide range. Ideally, we'd see things more in the 115 to 125 range.
I believe I was at a VFW over by Duluth, and I had 142.
Oh,
is what was showing up on the little power conditioner.
I got to look it up. I think it's C84 something. And I'm just right. I'm just going to look it up on my phone. I got to see if I'm right here. Yep, C84.1. There you go. It's been a long time since I thought about that. Let's see what it says. Of course, it's an ANSI document, so it's we'll be at this a while.
Scan.
Range A, utilization voltage, section 5.1.2. On page 3. Okay, we got to get all the way there. Well, this is just the purpose of the standard. Well, we're not even anywhere near page 3. I think I have to buy this document. Yeah, you have to buy the document. $95 to buy the document. But it's C84.1 in case you want to look it up.
Yeah, but then
I do have those numbers written down somewhere else that say what those recommended specs are, in case you don't want to buy it. Not trying to cost ANSI any money here, but
yeah, and that's what Brian who had asked a question, was the power conditioning voltage from the wall. So wonderful, thank you.
There you go, Brian. ANSI C84.1. I couldn't remember which C84 it was, but it's C84.1, and it tells you what the allowable voltage at the utilization and the service point is. The utilization is where you're going to use it. More notably, though, is actually, this is one thing I do remember, when the standard was published, some of the power companies basically said, we can't do that. So right away, it was kind of an admission that we have a lot of flux in our power, but you shouldn't see anything like you saw at 142, John. That's asking for trouble. And even more troublesome than overvolt is undervolt. When we drop voltage too far below, in order to make power, there's a relationship between voltage and current. And so in order to make power, we need a lot more current to make up for the lack of voltage. And So long and short of it, undervolt can be even more devastating, I think, than overvolt.
Good. We'll wrap things up with that, Ben. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or anything you'd like us to cover in a future show, please reach out to us. You can go out to the Ask Ben Stowe and Friends Facebook group now. It's been changed, but it's Ben Stowe and Friends. You can search for that on Facebook and join the group, and you can ask questions there. And some of those questions do get brought to the show as the questions become kind of more of a universal question that would help a lot of folks out. Otherwise, just message us, and we just appreciate your thoughts and ideas. So, Ben, have yourself a great week, and we will catch you next Tuesday night.
Thanks, John.
Catch everyone later. Bye-bye.